Thank you so much for having me. My name is Gina Waldhorn, and I am the co-founder and COO of a company called Evolution. My background, I come from the big ad agency world, and I started Evolution 3 years ago with the vision of connecting the worlds of big brands and early stage technology startups and partnering those two further upstream in the development process to find a win-win, help brands move faster, be more innovative, and help more startups succeed.
Hi, I'm Jan. First of all, thanks, Balazs, for putting my description up there. I guess it's the best way to describe myself as like a lifestyle entrepreneur. Like the easiest way and the fastest way, what I usually tell people is I'm unemployed. But in reality, I work on probably 10 different projects at the same time. I'm involved in a bunch of startups. I'm mentoring a lot of startups. I write a blog. I published a few books. And I guess lifestyle entrepreneur is just the easiest word to describe it. Oh yeah, and I worked in corporate venture capital, started a company also in China, and so I've seen a bit.
Hi everyone. Oh, there we go. Hi everyone, I'm Chris Chabot. So I work as the Chief Program Officer at Fiedler Capital, a VC firm. The reason why I chose that job title is because it sounded a little bit like free CPO. So I'm trying to keep the nerdy in VC. The thing that's always driven me is this concept of innovation, and that's been part of my career from my earliest days, where technology can fundamentally change the way the world works and push us forward as humanity, which I think is the most brilliant concept that exists. And the reason why I'm often in this region is because there's these places in the planet where people are generally comfortable, they have a lot of money, they've got a good job, so they sit on the couch and play Flappy Bird. Nothing really happens. But these other places in the world where people have real problems and real opportunities, and they build something brilliant and amazing that makes you go, this changes everything. And I think that's the most exciting thing that could possibly exist. So that's why I'm here today, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference. This is going to be pretty cool, right?
Yeah, and already I don't trust you. Like the usual geek won't be that positive or anything, which is good, But so this panel is going to be on how to build a global startup from scratch, or from Slovenia, or Croatia, or Serbia, or the rest of the region. I'll start with Mike, actually. In your talk, you mentioned how if you were going to start a business, there's probably someone starting something similar or working on something similar somewhere else in the world. So in terms of defining what a globally successful startup can be, what does a company have to be ready to be a globally successful startup coming from Slovenia, for example, right?
Sure. Well, I think, at the root, it's just as difficult, in some ways maybe even more difficult, to take on a small problem than a big problem. And the world market is defined by big problems. So I think at the core, big problem touches a lot of human beings, touches a lot of cultures, touches fundamental human behaviors, has the potential to be on the world stage regardless of origin. Doesn't matter where it's from. It's a question of how big and powerful the idea is. The other is for the team to recognize just how challenging this is and to be ready for it. So 107 companies in the startup competition here, of which one will win, 5 made the finals. There are 200, something like that, major economies. So each one of them has 107, and on it goes. So to be ready for the world stage, you have to be ready to compete on the world stage, which means you have to be really, really committed and really good at what you're doing as a team, and know it, believe it yourselves, and be ready to take on any and all comers. I think that's more important than any other factor.
You mentioned the world stage. So for a lot of companies coming from this part of the world, when we think about markets, in a lot of cases, especially for B2B, the world market ends up being the US. You talked about myths. Is like focusing on the US when going to the world market something that's true and sort of should focus on it as a primary market, or not so much?
Right. Well, we were talking about this, some people and I at breakfast. It used to be that the default was the U.S. It still often is, but increasingly the default is shifting to Asia for the simple reason that's where the people are. So if you're familiar with Line, which is an incredibly successful mobile community platform, started in Korea, perfected in Japan, came to the U.S. as the third market and now is dominant. Or WeChat started and grown to dominance in Asia, and I have to use it now because all of my Asian friends use it and it's the only way to get in touch with them. So there are some different flows emerging, but it's pretty simple. If you want to be global and big, you go where the people are. And the people are in Asia and the money's in the U.S.
Jan, you've worked with startups in the region, mentored them, talked to them. You've been to Belgrade, you've been to Osijek. In terms of like sales and business development and reaching users around the globe that Mike is talking about, how hard it is for companies from this part of the world. What should they again focus on? What should they think of? Because when we talk about them, it's mostly okay. Companies from this part of the world are very engineering led. Sales, business development, not so much. What do you think?
I think it's a very valid point, but I wouldn't really necessarily just focus on this region. I say, like, I'm from Germany, so it's exactly the same thing in Germany. We were brilliant engineers, whatever you want to call it. So I guess what's really important is to learn sales and business development from the ground up. So what I learned, having also been working with entrepreneurs from all over Europe, is they usually don't really necessarily learn it with a tech product because a tech product is super complex. You're usually busy working on your product that it works. So what I really think, what makes a lot of sense is start selling, for example, start selling orange juice. The dynamics behind it is exactly the same. You learn the psychology behind sales. You learn how sales really works. So I really believe that you should start maybe even executing bad ideas in the beginning just to learn the basic behind it. And I see it in a way a little bit like dating, right? When you start dating, usually you have no clue about anything. And if you wait your entire life just for this one woman of your dreams or the man of your dreams, and you've never dated before, you'll probably screw it up. And the same for startups. If you've never really executed an idea, and if you wait for that one big idea, you'll have no clue how to really execute it. So for me, it's really start executing all sorts of different things, even if it's a bad idea, but then you'll get ready and be ready for the really big idea. And also a lot of people ask me, Jan, is this a good idea or a bad idea? If someone asks me that question, I already know there's going to be a bad idea because it's actually not about the ideas. Actually, it is about the idea, but then it's also about hundreds and hundreds of other ideas. It's about the execution, and the execution is about thousands of other ideas. So I guess it's really by start simply, for example, Richard Branson started selling Christmas trees when he was 12 years old. And then the next thing was something else. And then at one point he started an airline. And I guess it's something that we Europeans can learn from the people from the States. I had to learn myself the hard way. I was struggling for 5 years, and that's like the lesson that I learned from Americans, that you guys are ready to go, for example, on bad dates just to learn.
Chris, so as a nerd, self-proclaimed nerd, again, developing a good product, selling it as a nerd, as a geek, how hard it is? Again, working from this part of the world, we can learn from the US. What would you advise?
So as you may know, I've spent like 6 to 8 years in Silicon Valley as well. I've also done business in Europe. And I think the hardest thing for a nerd anywhere is that when you create a great product, you have this idea if you build it, they will come. But as Mike said earlier, like no one gives a crap. No one's going to notice your product. No one is going to pay attention to you. So if you build something great and you leave it there, nothing happens. And that's disappointing, right? So often I realize that whenever I say how hard can it be, that's the moment where I know I'm going to get into a world of pain because I don't know how hard it is. And it often turns out it is pretty hard. So the thing that happens here, but it happens in the US as well, if you get a couple of MIT students, they have the same idea of I'm building something technically brilliant and then nothing happens to it. So there's this process to go from a brilliant product to a brilliant company. And that's a tough process because it means realizing that the knowledge you have, which might be brilliant engineering or design or whatever, is not sufficient. You also need to learn a lot about how to sell your product, how to brand your product, how to message the value around it. One of the anecdotes, if you allow me, is the greatest thing since sliced bread. That's an expression that anyone who speaks English knows this expression. And it means this is the best invention ever. Now you might think to yourself, what did they say before that? Was the greatest thing since the steam engine? But anyway, so when Otto invented sliced bread, he did all the things that engineers do. He filed the patents, he designed the prototype, he did all the stuff that you're supposed to do right. Complete and utter failure, and no one used it. It wasn't until a company came along called Wonder Bread that sold the story of the time saving and quality time with your family and empowering your children, all these other wonderful emotional things that made people go, this is much better than anything I've done before, that it became a big invention that we still use today in our expression. So taking the step from invention to communicating value and figuring out distribution and marketing and sales, that's a big gap between those two. So the biggest lesson that I've learned is building a great product is only the first step in a much longer process.
But, okay, from that story, I would take away that a nerd can build a great product, but he can't sell it. He has to wait for someone else. Is that true? Because for a lot of people that build products, it's hard to get in the mindset, or at least it seems to be hard to get into the mindset of selling and doing the business development and talking to customers and everything else. How is it like go to Accelerator to learn that, or what do you think?
So I run an accelerator program, so obviously I think that's a great solution. Otherwise I wouldn't be investing my time in it. But I think that not being great at it is not a good reason not to do it. Because if you get an external marketing company, an external PR company, or Salesforce or whatever, they don't know your customer like you do, because you are your own customer in many ways, right? You build something cool to solve your own solution. So a sales guy will never be able to give you the feedback on how to change your product and how to better fit in the market and what the market demand is and what people are willing to pay for. So these guys that are in a contract, they're just earning money by the hour or by the month, they don't have the passion that you have. They don't have the background that you have. So there's no easy shortcut there. There's no cheat code that you can use to say, all we need now is a sales guy and it will figure itself out. Because as you showed earlier, like the first product you come up with is probably not that great. It's a great product on itself, but it's not a great product for the market yet. So you need to talk to your customers, go out there, listen to their stories, see where their pain points are, and see what they're willing to pay for you to solve. And that's kind of the process you have to go through. You have to iterate, you have to get that feedback to go, hey, wait a minute, if I change these things about my product or pivot completely to a different kind of concept, that's where magic starts to happen. Once you hit that point, which we often call product market fit, that's where suddenly people are banging on your doors and you can't sell it quickly enough. Like that's the point you want to get to, and other people are not going to be able to figure that out for you. So even though you're a brilliant engineer and not a great salesperson, that means you have to learn how to be a great salesperson for your product. And that's the only way you can really get a great company off the ground. Now, of course, you can choose to do that with co-founders, but it's better if they get in early in the process instead of joining at the end where they have no idea what the product is and how it came to be. And you need people who feel your pain, they feel your passion, they understand the market like you do, so you can actually get that collaboration there. But in general, I think the best startups are the ones that started with brilliant engineers that also became brilliant business people at the end of the process. But it's a process. You don't start out as a great salesperson when you just build a startup. And that's okay. You will probably fuck around for a while. Like, it's often said that overnight success takes 1,000 days. You've got time to learn. That's okay.
So again, go on bad dates, right?
Talking to customers, Gina, so you work with big brands, right? You work with agencies that work with big brands, Madison Avenue, the whole shtick. So in this part of the world, we've seen that a lot of startups are B2B focused. They want to work with big brands or want to get distribution through big brands. But again, they're here in Southeastern Europe. We can talk to like local offices, whatever, but in most cases it's not to the right people. How hard it is to get the chance to talk to big brands in the US without maybe your help, but like doing it on their own?
Yep. So I think the first thing is, I love what you said about kind of telling your story and Wonder Bread. The pitch that you give to an investor as a founder in a startup is a totally different pitch than you would give to a brand. The head of innovation or a brand manager, someone that you're looking to partner with to get you a case study to help you prove concept, to get you the distribution that Mike spoke about. So you want to make sure, one, that you're not going in there and talking about your code and your patents and your team, because the brand doesn't care. What they care about is the value that you create for their business and for their end consumer. So once you've kind of established, all right, what's the story I'm going to tell, think about the value that you create and who you create that for at the big brand organization. So you solve a problem. And think about, are you collecting email addresses potentially? Are you creating community with what you've developed? That matters to somebody in CRM and data and relationship management in an organization. So don't try to go schedule a meeting with, somebody in packaging or just anybody at the brand. Try to navigate the organization based on the value that you create. You've got a solution that somebody is being kept up at night trying to figure out. Find that person and tell your story to that person. And also I think, B2B or B2C. B2B, definitely think about how you're, structuring your organization and your business model. Are you licensing? Are you willing to give competitive exclusivity? Think about what you're willing to do for that brand before you go into the organization. And finally, understand their problem. So you want to do your research. A really good example I can tell you is the gum industry. So believe it or not, nobody is buying gum. And I'll tell you why. Because if you've gone into a supermarket recently and you're walking kind of through the aisle and you're checking out, and there's the checkout counter where all the gum and candies exist, you're usually on your phone. So the rise of the mobile device, there's a direct correlation with a decline in gum and candy sales because everybody's playing games or Flappy Bird or texting someone and nobody's buying gum anymore. So gum manufacturers have this problem and they're looking for solutions. Are there proximity technology that could help them intercept people? Is there new e-commerce solutions for buying gum and candies? They've got real problems because of technology in a shifting and disruptive category. How can your startup help solve that problem? Make sure you're kind of clear on that story and you're ready to tell that story to the right person at the brand. And I think no matter where you are in any region, that's the story you want to go in with.
So how, getting back to gum, to get really deep into the problem, if we have geek founders that want to learn how to sell, do business development, okay, the first step for them, it's what you're talking about is going to seem a bit tough just because they're maybe not talking to a lot of agencies here, maybe they don't have the experience. What would be the first steps for you? Is it going to an event in New York and just like meeting people that they think could be a fit? Like what would you do if you were based in Ljubljana and you have a ticket to New York like in 3 months? What would be your steps?
Definitely events. There is an unbelievable community in the US, in the Valley, in New York. There is a meetup group every night, and brands are attending these. I would definitely say co-working spaces. So a lot of brands, and what we help our clients do, big Fortune 500s like Nestle and Anheuser-Busch, they're going and they're spending time in these co-working spaces, and they're offering free kind of office hours and mentoring sessions. So there are a lot of brands who are trying to get more involved in the tech community via events and conferences. I mean, definitely check out kind of who's coming to a conference discussion boards, and look for those brand marketers and kind of proactively reach out to them. I'd also say agencies are a good route to go. They're obviously very obsessed with scale. So a lot of agencies don't want to open the door to kind of early stage startups, but early stage and upstream in your development process is when you want to start talking to brands. But find that right person, find that intern, find that evangelist. You'll find a lot of agencies or brands today are hiring directors of innovation or technology evangelists or new business venture groups. It's their job to find you. So they're looking for you. They're attending the events. They're tweeting. They're doing interviews with blogs. Find the right people, probably on LinkedIn or social media, and you can usually find where they're going to be.
Can we also ask questions?
Sorry?
Can we also ask questions?
Of course, please.
So according to your experience, how long does it take from the initial contact to closing a deal with a big brand? Because I guess that's probably relevant for everybody, if not only for me.
It takes too long. And I've been in some situations where the startup has either received a round of funding and had to go into stealth before the deal could close and the brand lost out. The brand took so long the startup went out of business. Or they made a pivot and they started doing something totally different. So I think what you want to do to kind of shorten the length of time to get the deal done is come in with a test. Kind of don't bite off more than you can chew. Come up with a very small, isolated proof of concept test that doesn't cost very much, that you know for sure you could get into market within kind of under 12 weeks or less. The 90-day period is something that brands, it's probably the shortest they can move, but they are starting to be comfortable with a 90-day window. And kind of go in with a test. Start small, prove your concept, get that quick win, and then kind of look to scale. But they're not moving fast enough.
From the Shameless Self-Promotion Department, our fund actually has one of those conferences in New York called Pivot, specifically for senior executives from big brands who are responsible for transformational change. One of the challenges with big brands, they all look alike. I mean, they all have big buildings, they all have thousands of people, they all have big names, but not all of them are actually ready at any given point in time to take in and use new technology. So part of what we try and do for our own use, but also to be helpful to portfolio companies and others, is to identify the brands and the folks inside brands who are actually ready to do this. And then two other thoughts on brands. One is to remember the impact of pricing. So if you do your homework and you can find out that at company X, the individual office director can spend up to $5,000 out of his or her own budget, price at $49.99. So you can get that local sale or a couple of local sales, and then you can go to corporate with local endorsements saying, well, you're already using us, and we can lower the unit cost by being in more places. And then finally look, when we talk sales, as sales-oriented Americans, and America, sales, bad dates, and money, look for the individual whose compensation will be affected by the success or non-success of your product. So if you can go to somebody and say, I will make you money. You get paid by successful leads. You get paid by how much shelf space we have in this territory. And our company can change that for you. That's probably your buyer. And at least you know why that person, that particular individual, should buy from you.
So, Mike, to keep you on, what made you see that some of the startups in Slovenia, specifically two, Povio and Zemanta, were ready to, have the potential to be globally successful? Why did you decide, okay, they're from Slovenia, but that's fine? Just
experience. I mean, we've been at this, our little group, since literally before before the invention of the original PC. So decades. And we found that tech revolutions, even though they're all different from one another, appear to have very similar development characteristics. And so we've seen in each of the other tech revolutions, PC, the internet, that's happened, that when the tech starts to change, every company changes its rhetoric. So if we ask brands today, mobile your future? Uh-huh. And if we ask them, what are you going to do next Tuesday that's different? Nothing. I can't. By regulation, by habit, by everything, we can't change that fast. So most companies change their rhetoric, don't change their action. A subset of companies radically changes their action early in the tech revolution, and that's because they're either challenged. So the book business in the U.S., we are in deep trouble. We recognize we're in deep trouble. We have to act right now. Or they perceive an opportunity. Data-driven universe, we're American Express. We know how to make money with data, and now there's more data. We can make more money and increase our advantage. So we're looking for companies that are reacting that way, that perceive that opportunity to jump fast. And there are some tells by who they hire, the relative age of the CMO. I mean, there are a bunch of things that indicate a company that is getting ready to act as opposed to just talk. And we're trying to pull those out as much as we can. Do you agree? I mean, you deal with these companies.
Yeah. Something else I'd just add is definitely, you know, I speak about partnering with the brands further upstream while you're still developing your product. And I think because they move so slow and they have so many problems, you might be able to actually develop against those problems if you know about them. So a good example is Twitter. Twitter kept their doors shut. They really wouldn't talk to many brands or any brands at all as they were developing. They waited until they were totally scaled, had lots of investment, and then they started knocking on brand doors and said, hey, you know, do you want to buy a $100,000 sponsored tweet? Had they talked to some brands, and specifically, had Twitter spoken to the beverage, alcohol, spirits, beer industry, they would have thought to ask a simple question when you create your profile. How old are you? They didn't, and they scaled really big, and they blocked out being able to work and drive revenue from the beverage and spirits and beer industry because these companies, the Anheuser-Busch's of the world, couldn't work with Twitter because there was no age gate. So now they've kind of developed this workaround where if you try to follow a beer, it'll kind of ping you back and say, hey, actually go to this page and put in your fake birthday and then re-follow me and then retweet me and then I'll follow you and then you can follow me. So kind of if you start early and you find out, you know, wow, the spirits category cares about age gating, I should probably ask how old, if I'm building a nightlife app, I should probably ask how old people are so that now I can invite in this whole category of, you know, corporates.
Chris, on the matter of doing partnerships right, not like Twitter did, what would you recommend for developers, especially with your experience, right?
So it's interesting because I actually worked for Twitter. I worked for Google for a whole bunch of years as well, and I've done a lot of partnerships for them. And one of the things that
but you didn't talk to me to the brands, right? You talked to developers.
I talk to developers and brands and startups. I've done M&As, acquisitions, the whole gambit of all of those types of partnerships. And one of the things to keep in mind as we talk about partnerships is the power imbalance. And that sounds counterintuitive, but often you think this partnership is a fantastic win for both sides because you're a small startup and obviously good things are going to happen if you, say, partner with Google. Your future is made if that happens. Now, I've been on the other side of that table, and the way that Google thinks at that moment is our reputation is everything. The moment that people lose trust in Google, they won't search anymore, they won't use Gmail anymore. None of those products will get used anymore if the trust is violated. So here's a small company with 4 people, tiny bit of cash. What are the chances that they'll screw up? Either their server get hacked, they crash, they can't deal with the volume, or they just say something stupid in the press that will make everyone look bad. You know, that happens. This is not a large established company, so the trust relationship is out of balance, right? Google has a lot more to lose than they have to gain by partnering with someone. There's a cheat code to it, however, and that's whenever a company comes out with a new product that they want to promote, then they're willing to take risks because now you're talking to the marketing department who's got budget and they've got a lot of creative lenience to say, let's do something weird. So if you look at the cloud, then you're probably not going to partner with Amazon because they're too big, they don't give a crap, they don't need partners, they're big enough. You know, Google has nothing to prove in the cloud space. They've got the biggest cloud on the planet, even though it's not always used by other people. They still have the most servers of anyone. So they don't have anything where they really need to express their superiority in whatever way. But Microsoft is late to this game. Microsoft Azure is a relatively new platform that not a lot of people are using yet, and they're putting massive amounts of dollars into promoting it. You will see them at conferences. You'll probably see them behind me on the slides here. They'll be at every conference, and they'll look for partners everywhere because these are the success stories they need to tell other people like, hey, if you use our platform, you could be as successful as these guys. And those are the moments where partnering with large companies suddenly becomes a pull instead of a push relationship. They will actually track you down and make sure that you become a great success story to use in their communication to the rest of the market. So that's one type of partnership that's a lot easier than the silver bullet thinking of only I could get Twitter to promote me. Because that's never going to happen. The power balance there, it just doesn't match up. So until you're a large company with billions of dollars of valuation, you're probably not going to do that type of a partnership unless you solve a very specific problem. And even then, they probably don't move as fast as you would like them to, because in a big organization, you have to convince the director and then the vice president, and he has to talk to the other vice president, whose nephew doesn't really like that you're not using that other company. And this process gets large and complicated. So it's a powerful thing when it happens, but it doesn't happen fast enough or often enough. And in those situations, they might more likely want to acquire you or control you completely than say, let's take a bet on this small company that hasn't proven itself yet. Other partnerships can be interesting too, like talking about global apps. There are two major markets right now. And I think that's an unpopular thing to say, but an important thing to say, that if you want to be globally successful, you have to look and feel American. And that's a terrible thing to say, and I'm not an American either. I was born in the Netherlands, live in London now, even though I spent some time there. But there's this pattern matching that people automatically do in their head. You know if you see fire, you're going to burn your finger. That's a pattern. You did it twice, you're never going to do it again. You know that apps that you like and that are powerful and well-made and have great functionality look and feel American. The language they use, the tone of voice, the design. So all those things go into the pattern matching of, is this an app I want to use or not? And whenever people tell me, Chris, this can't be true, right? That sucks. Like, we're proud of our country. I always ask them, like, hey, you're German. You use German apps, right? Yes, I do. Do you use French apps? Hell no. Well, exactly, that's the thing. Like, you might use apps from your own country. You don't use apps from other countries unless they look and feel American. So what I'm trying to get to in a very lengthy process while sneaking in a completely new point is, partnerships can be a great way to get the right cultural match. Like, I talked to some game developers that had a fantastic game where there's a lumberjack, he needed to cut down trees. It was actually a lot of fun, mobile app. And they wanted to go to China. The first time they tried, they failed miserably. Turns out you can't just translate the language. You have to translate the culture as well, because the whole concept of a lumberjack doesn't exist in Chinese culture. It's not an icon to them. It doesn't have a meaning to them. So it's just a weird guy with an axe, which sounds kind of like a mass murderer. It's super creepy if you're Chinese. So they had to translate that and put animals instead of people in there and find all these different ways in which it resonated with the Chinese market. So those are great partnerships when you can find someone who can do distribution for you. If you build an accountancy solution and you can power something in Quicken, then they've got a great distribution channel. You have to split the profit. You might not make as much as you like, but you get access to millions of customers. That can be a win. Another valuable partnership is, hey, I've built hardware, and now I'm talking to this mega chain who wants 100,000 units in the first order. And you go, holy shit, to build 100,000 units, that's millions of dollars, and I've got $20 in my account. Like, how am I going to make this happen? Like, I don't want success to kill me. Well, at that moment, getting a distribution partner that has the production capacity, that has the shelf space in the right stores, those are great things, and you'll probably end up making a lot less money per unit, but you'll suddenly be in the entire global market. So all of those kind of partnerships are valid. But I think the main thing I want to warn for is that there's no silver bullets, unfortunately. It's a little bit like the...
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Because now you're sitting here, that's like a question I was asking myself many, many years. I never partnered up with Google, any big brands. So is it actually a way, because a lot of people go B2B first, is it a solution to, first of all, go B2C and pretty much target all of the employees that are working at Google. So then at the end of the day, you go to Google and tell them, like, look, all of your employees are already using it, like, for their personal stuff. Is that a way to also shorten the long B2B sales cycle, that I go B2C first and then show them, look, all of your employees are already using it, so let's make a big deal out of it. Is that an opportunity?
Oh, absolutely. I love that approach. Like, my favorite example today is Slack. Slack is a communication tool, and they went from no one knowing about them to every startup I talk to is using Slack. Even Rackspace and Adobe and all these other large companies. And the way they get there is exactly the thing that you point out, that there's one team in the organization that says, we've got a few people distributed over different cities, countries, whatever. Let's use this chat client to share documents and funny photos of cats and talk to each other. And it's a great tool. And then one team starts using it, and then another team goes, that's kind of cool. I love your solution. I'll start using it as well. And when you get to a certain inflection point where enough people in a company are using it, then you call the CTO and you say, hey, dude, you've got 100 employees using this. That's not the cheapest solution. We can give you a volume pack. You also want to de-risk the situation because you're not in control of the chat archives. If a lawyer calls you and they want to get all the information, that's not ideal. So buy a corporate license off of us, and we'll solve all of these problems. We'll take away the risk, and we're done. And a lot of companies use that, especially in the developer space. If you get a cloud-based solution for building mobile apps, used by some of the developers, and they love it, then you can go to the CTO and say, hey, by the way, did you know we have paid support and we can take away your risk? Fantastic.
Great, so it works. Perfect.
Because we have just 10 minutes, we'll move to the questions from the audience. So, questions for these guys. Oh, come on, I know it's the morning, but hey. Not yet, okay. Then my last question before these guys get the nerve to ask a question, come on. What would you guys like to see in terms of the industries that startups should focus on coming from this part of the world? We've seen success with B2B startups, we've seen success with game startups like Nodus. What do you like, what do you think that there's a better chance of people focusing on?
Maybe from start. So okay. So what I found surprising is that the entire region, not only the Balkans, also Romania, is that no one really focuses on the problems that you have right now, like solving, first of all, problems that you have, and that's also a good playing ground, right? Because like I'm a European, I'm scared of Americans, and most of us are. So why not like go into before you jump in the big shark tank? With all those Americans that know exactly what they're doing. Why not solve local problems first, build the local infrastructure? Because what I hear over and over again, be it Slovenia, Romania, Poland, Czech Republic, is, oh, we have so many problems, blah, blah, blah. But why don't you solve the problems first? Try to become a mini shark, and then you can go into the shark tank with the Americans if you're too scared right away. So really try to develop local infrastructure. There's like a startup here, Farmia, from Croatia. They're solving a problem with, what's that?
Serbia.
Oh, Serbia. And they're solving a local problem first. So they start getting better and better because we all suck in the beginning. When we do something new, like for example riding a bicycle, it takes a hell lot of time and we suck in the beginning. And to be really competitive, I feel, or at least it's just because I'm scared as shit, is to really try and solve local problems first because it's a lot easier. Because here you're only competing with other people that say, oh, actually, we have so many problems. But if you go to the States, you'll be competing with the best of the world, not only from one country, but each and every country. So maybe solve local problems first, get better, become a baby shark, and then jump into the big tank. This is just my personal opinion.
What would you say then to startups that think, like Farmia, for example? So there's a number of those kind of startups in the region now, agrotech, like Farmeron, for example, which is from Croatia. Their argument is simple, is that they've tried a bit in Croatia or Serbia or whatever, and A, the market is small, and B, companies that are in that industry here are not ready for that kind of disruption. In the US, they think, okay, these guys have seen what happens in Silicon Valley, they're kind of scared, and they're far more scared than the guys back home. So they'll maybe react before. What do you think?
So I'm not sure if I got your question right.
what would you say to that counter argument to not go?
Oh no, it's perfect because you learn how you actually approach people. Because if you never approached anybody, right, and you learned in your home turf, so you get more confident. And I guess at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is really about getting more confident. And if you learn in your home turf, you get better and better. And then even if you realize, oh, wait a minute, the market is not ready, you learn quite a lot about the market, about what sentences do I have to use, what triggers like the brain of the guy that I want to sell my product to. What are the sentences that trigger their brain and say, wait a minute, I want to use this. So it's pretty much a learning experience, and it's not wasted because you learn a hell lot of things. So maybe you start off here, you realize, wait a minute, the market is not ready, and then you go more confident to the States or any other country. So that's just like how I see it.
At a macro level, I think for a region like this, and a country like Slovenia, look at Israel. Size is about the same, I think, as this region overall, and they've done an outstanding job of essentially turning the entire country into a startup accelerator and into a natural beta market for the bigger market. So they recognize you can't really get huge, and Israel is only 6-7 million people. There are a couple of million people here, but they can get a lot done in the local market that can play on the world stage. And they focus very specifically on the US and secondarily on Japan, almost as a country that we're going to get things going here, get them to a certain point, get the attention of folks over there, send somebody over there and grow. The other thing they've done very well is use the natural focus, in their case, military. So they've got this very heavy military focus in the country, so they're good at security, they're good at messaging, they're good at certain kinds of things. They have folks trained in those coming out of the Army. They have specialties there, so that's where they get a lot of advantage because they're really world-class at that. And whether it's aquaculture or anything else, what is regionally the focus here, what can you be really great at, and where are there other places on Earth that have similar problems, Africa, wherever, and play to your strengths that way.
And I would say take advantage of the fact that a lot of the American startups think they're the bee's knees and they're just focused on their market. If you're building and you're already building with a global penetration in mind, that's an advantage that you have because at least in terms of partnerships with big brands, they're thinking globally. So, you know, I work with Nestle and like I said, Anheuser-Busch, they're thinking about the BRIC markets, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, especially kind of China and India. You guys are closer, you're building with those countries in mind, whereas startups in the US are just like, we don't need to because we're in the US and everyone's going to invest in us and we're great. But the brands are ultimately looking for global scale. So take advantage of that you're building with global in mind because most of the entrepreneurs in the US, even though good mentors tell them to build globally, you know, think about translation and the future of, you know, your product globally, they're not, and you guys are, and that's definitely a big one up.
They don't listen, US startups. If you're looking for a weakness, if you listen, don't think you know it all. Listen to folks from any country, any market that you might serve. That's going to be a big advantage for you. If there's one weakness culturally in U.S. startups, they do think they know it all. And they are happy to tell you they know it all at length and aren't humble enough, don't listen enough, don't learn enough. And it's an advantage that goes to anybody who does.
So there's one thing I wanted to add just to address the fear you were talking about earlier, and that's American startups don't have it all figured out. And I think we all agree to this. The only reason why it looks like American startups have it figured out is because you only see about the success cases. And there's this entire country experimenting and building, and 99% of them fail. They're terrible at it, but the country's large enough that those few success cases make big enough headlines that you kind of get intimidated. You go, holy crap, how am I going to compete in this Shark Tank? But the fact is that every startup that became a shark is the exception to a lot of failures. So they're just as likely to succeed as you are, so don't be intimidated by that. The one thing that I'll definitely give Americans is they're better at using the type of language you're describing of, we're amazing, we're fantastic, we're big, we're powerful, it's inevitable, we're curve jumping, patent pending, greatest thing since sliced bread. Americans are great in that language, and I think us as Europeans, we have this humility built in that we're not supposed to say that. One of my favorite angel investor ladies in Stockholm, she is American, she married a guy who's from Sweden, and at some point they were going to go skiing. And she asked him, how are you in skiing? Well, pretty okay. Well, I'm fantastic at skiing, so let's go. Turned out when they actually went skiing that he's pretty okay on an Olympic level. She was fantastic, as in she went to Tahoe twice. So the communication is very different between these cultures, right? I think that's something to be aware of, that it's good to be loud when the situation calls for it. It's good to overcome this hesitation of presenting yourself as an amazing invention. But other than that, I don't see anything in the region here that will keep you from success. In fact, I think there's a lot of untapped talent here, which is absolutely not true in America. There's a talent constraint there. Labor is much cheaper here. We all have access to the same resources. You can go to Product Hunt or Reddit or all these different channels where you can learn with the same entrepreneurs, learn the same lessons. The world is open to you.
Yeah, one thing I'd say, if you want to pattern yourself on American startups, it's not being a loudmouth. It's, though Americans are pretty good at being loudmouths. It's the characteristic that seems to be present in the big successes, and that may be a little bit of a cultural edge for Americans, is that Americans are not embarrassed by failing. They'll fail over and over and over again, get up and go, that was interesting, we learned from that, let's do it again. And the great companies do that. They experiment all the time, they throw things against the wall, they learn from everything they do, they keep trying to get better a day at a time, they don't slow down because they screwed something up, and they keep the team focused through all those changes, and it doesn't distract them. If you can keep changing under control and not become distracted, eventually you're going to start getting things right. And if you can go through that process and keep the team with you, your chances of success go way up. And in some cultures, there's a tendency to go, I failed, and to stop, think about that too much, worry about it, slow down. Americans don't do that. At least the really good ones don't. They just keep plowing on. Baseball's a national sport, right? And you fail 2 times out of 3 and you still win the World Series. That's America.